We're going to move on to the third and final segment for tonight, which is redemption, apologies, forgiveness, and the road back after having kind of fallen off the deep end. Clip number 3, we have a clip, ethical, moral clip about apologies, the do's and the don'ts.
So guess who called me last night? Jason? Hanky.
Stanky Hanky? What did he want?
He called to apologize for standing me up 5 years ago.
Why now?
AA. It's one of the 12 steps. Step number 9 is you have to apologize to everyone you've ever wronged.
Oh, I can't wait for Hanky to come crawling back to me.
Still with the neck hole?
Still upset, very upset.
What neck hole?
Remember that New Year's party he threw a few years ago? He had that very drafty apartment, you know, I think on 9th Avenue.
Pastor?
I asked if I could borrow a sweater.
A cashmere sweater.
I said preferably cashmere for warmth. So in front of the whole party, he says, "No, I don't want you stretching out the neck hole." Oh, yeah, sure, laugh it up. Everybody else did.
Oh, it's funny. I mean, you have a big head.
Hey, where's Hanky?
All right, it's grovel time.
Hey, George. Jerry. Listen, I just got sober, so I've been going through the 12 steps.
What are you up to now? Step 9?
Yeah. Making amends.
Important step. Maybe the most important.
Anyway, Jerry, you know, this may sound dumb, but, you know, when we first met, I thought your name was Gary. And I think I may even have called you Gary a couple of times, and I don't know if you noticed, but I always felt bad about it, so I'm sorry.
Thank you. I did notice, and I appreciate you rectifying it.
Great. Great. Well, I'll see you guys later.
Oh, hello, Hanky. Others?
George.
You know, Jason, I couldn't help notice. I didn't get my apology.
Apology for what?
A drafty apartment, a sweaterless friend, a ball game giveaway, MetLife windbreaker.
George, come on, not that neck hole thing.
Yeah, the neck hole thing, and I would appreciate it if you would say you're sorry.
No way, you would have completely stretched it out.
You're an alcoholic. You have to apologize. Step 9. Step 9.
All right, George, all right, I'm sorry. I'm very, very sorry. I'm so sorry that I didn't want your rather bulbous head struggling to find its way through the normal-sized neck hole of my finely knit sweater.
So there we have a clip about an apology. Karen, you're an expert when it comes to helping your clients apologize. Give us some guidance here about effective apologizing, the wrong way to apologize, or when it may be better not to apologize at all.
You know, sometimes we used to kid that we would answer our phone, apologies are us, because that's what we were in the business of. I would say the 5 worst mistakes you can make when you apologize. The first one is if you start your apology with the word if. If I offended you. I mean, you wouldn't be apologizing if you hadn't offended somebody, so to start that way immediately takes away their agency. The second one is to talk about your intention. It's not about you. I never intended to apologize. My intention was no one wants to hear it. Again, it takes away from how real you are. The third one is to talk about, in my day, this was acceptable. Or when I came up, it was okay to say things like this. Or this expression used to mean, because nobody, again, it's not about you, but those are the ways we see apologies written all the time. If it's inauthentic, it's pretty obvious. Although I would say we've written a lot that are somewhat performative and they seem to have done the trick, but I would not recommend that. And the most important is the speed with which you apologize. Because increasingly now in this world of cancel culture, while it is a harsh judge, without a doubt, it is also a judge that if you quickly own up, if you quickly apologize, if the apology is well crafted, if it's heartfelt, and if you really speak to what that impact is to the person you're apologizing to, and you accept the responsibility, it will do the trick. It really will. But if you're Will Smith and you wait 3 months after you smack somebody on the stage of the Academy Awards, and then 3 months later you finally feel you're ready to apologize, you're not going to be able to get back from that. And that's really the speed. As much as I know many of you, and we argue with many of you all the time about apologies, because so many of you tell us we are not apologizing for this, Karen, it's going to hurt my case. That the speed with which you apologize really can begin to take away an awful lot of the sting.
Mr. Brofman, when do you recommend clients apologize, when not? Or if clients come to you and say, you know, I understand the case is what it is, but I feel the need to apologize. How do you counsel them
Well,
when they have those urges?
I will tell you one of the favorite tactics of almost every major police department is in a case of what we call date rape or sexual non-consensual activity, according to one person involved in the encounter. The police department, takes the person who comes to them and says, we want you to call your friend and tell them that you are horrified by what they did and get them to apologize. And the minute they apologize, they get arrested. And you can generally almost go straight to jail because of an apology where when you examine the facts, there was A, no reason to apologize, B, there really wasn't a crime that was committed under the law, and many of these cases are successfully defensible, but not for what we call it hello call. It's hello, last night was terrible, you offended me, and inevitably, the person on the other end says, I'm really sorry, I didn't mean to. And at the end of the day, you've essentially, cut out just about any kind of defense that the facts allowed you to have. And I will tell you something which, it worked in a case, and I was right, and they agreed with me, where, a couple meet in a bar. He is a male model, she is a female model. They get completely drunk, and they end up in her apartment. They have extraordinary sex, and the next day she has regret. And she goes to the precinct, they call him, and he says, I'm really sorry, I'm really sorry. At the end of the day, I said to the chief of the sex crimes unit, let me ask you a question. If I'm so drunk as a woman that I cannot consent under the law because the rule today is, if I'm incapable of consenting as a result of alcohol, you can't have sex with me. How does the man who is equally drunk know that you are too drunk not to consent when it's not an offensive act of compassion? It's they have sex, and then at the end, one party regrets it. So I think apologizing early on, quickly, is never good. It may make Karen's job easier. In most cases, I think the apology can be used against you. And since you're not in custody, nobody has to advise you of your right to remain silent. And sometimes that 20-second conversation can undercut the effort of even, the best prepared, most experienced criminal defense lawyer.
Karen, please respond.
What?
Karen, please
To
respond.
which one? To the woman who was drunk, or to no? I would say this too.
That happens. It happens.
Lots of things happen, but I would say this. When I talk about the apology right, it's not because everything we do is a criminal case. I mean, that's not, our business is all over the place. It can be someone who's on a school board who said something at a school board meeting and it blew up, and all of a sudden their kids are getting, harassed, and they are getting harassed. That's when we get the call. We get the call when all of a sudden a company is defending its intellectual property and its name perhaps, and they're taking on a small business and everybody thinks that they're acting like a bully. How do they respond to that? It is when we get those kinds of matters on a regular basis. It is when somebody has, sometimes it's sexual harassment, sometimes it's employment related, sometimes it's somebody who said something to a fellow colleague who didn't think that what they said was offensive, but the person took it as offense, went to HR, we get the phone call and they say, before this becomes a case where we're gonna have to defend it, is there a way to cut this right now? That's when we draft those kinds of apologies with the person and have to sometimes twist their arm to have them walk across the hall to the colleague that they just offended and say, you know what? I'm sorry. I saw the reaction on your face. I understand that you were offended. My action was wrong, and I want to apologize to you. And it's amazing how often that can neutralize those kinds of situations. Ben's cases are very different. The stakes are very different, but that's not that's not the only world that cancel culture affects. Cancel culture goes
What if the comment is not offensive, but it's in your mind flattering or complimentary? You can't even do that today. I mean, I've had major cases blow up because, a chief executive who honestly believed that their female administrative assistant dressed well and said something about an outfit, and then suddenly all hell broke loose.
Credit number 2, your intention doesn't matter.
No, but it should.
But it doesn't, because
Okay,
it doesn't,
well.
because what matters
Then apologizing
is
only
how
makes it worse, in
is
my
how
opinion.
I view it. Listen, we had one of a judge who said it was his secretary's birthday, and he walked in and said, "It's your birthday, come over and give me a hug."
It's different.
Give me a hug. And she said, "I'm offended by what you said." And he said to us, "Where am I allowed to touch her?" What do you mean, where am I allowed to touch? We said, right here, like this. I mean, you may not feel it that way. You may have been brought up at a time when it was not offensive. You may think that that's a compliment. You may think it's okay to say that, but that's not the times in which we're living, and you've got to respond to the market. And the market says, you don't go there, and you don't say that.
I'm not saying you go there. I'm saying that very often the apology makes things worse.
Depends when. It's all a matter of time. I want to interrupt for a moment and tell you a quick story. I called a woman a few months ago in Florida.
Wait, aren't you happy we're not agreeing? I thought you liked
It's
that.
good. This
Okay,
is
all
good.
right.
But everything has its time. It's enough of it. No, I'm kidding. I was kidding. It's a joke. It's okay if it's a joke, right? I called a woman in Florida. She had just had hip surgery. So I called her up. It was a month later. I said, "How did the hip surgery go?" She said, "Well, there were some complications. They gave her the wrong anesthesia. They gave her anesthesia for a knee surgery instead of a hip surgery, so she was stuck in bed for a few extra days." So I told her, "Are you going to sue?" She said, "No, the hospital apologized. And they said they made a mistake. They told me how the mistake happened. And they said what they were going to do to see to it, the protocols put into place that it wouldn't happen again. And that's enough for me." And she said, she quoted a study from a hospital somewhere where they started apologizing for their mistakes and the rates of lawsuits dropped by like 80%. So there is a time when apologizing can be a very effective way of being sincere and honest about one's feelings without all the negative
That
consequences.
woman never spoke to a personal injury lawyer.
She may be sorry she didn't, but Jeff, give us a word about apologies and your practice in interacting with clients, the ethical dilemmas that come up in the world of apologies.
Sure. One thing that
10 minutes, we're going to be done. 8:30 on the dot, we're done, guaranteed.
the acceptance of responsibility is part. If you find yourself at sentencing, that is part of the guidelines analysis, so that the court wants to see a full recognition. If you're acknowledging the conduct, not in the case you're trying. But if there's a plea and you go into court, you get less of a sentence for acknowledging what you've done. What Mr. Brofman is talking about is much, much different. He's talking about the laying a trap, with the apology essentially triggering a series of events that's going to be very hard to unwind.
Rabbi Jacobson, help us out over here. High holidays are coming up. Many people will be going to synagogue, and we will be apologizing to friends we may have insulted on panels and others, and sins we may have committed against God. And what's the Jewish steps to effective apologies, just in general?
There's some people have apology form letters. They just send them every year. They just change the date. So I'm assuming you're not referring to that, right?
Not referring to that.
I will say something. I want to comment on the discussion that we had here earlier, and then I'll respond to your question. I would challenge, Ben, I would ask you this question. Let's say someone comes to you and has not retained you yet, and they said, if I apologize, I may diffuse the whole situation, and there's no liability. Should I apologize? Or, I'm not suggesting that you want to have their business, but sometimes it seems like the common sense thing because it may diffuse the situation. Again,
Every case is fact-specific. And when you're talking about the high holidays, you're talking to God. That's different.
Well, you have to apologize to your fellow that you hurt as well.
But God
you can't apologize to God. I'm sorry I stole money from my partner. That doesn't work.
God understands what you've done, why you did it, how you did it, He doesn't need you to tell him, I'm never going to do it again. He needs to hear you that you're sincerely regretting it. Regret is not necessarily an apology. Feeling regret over something you did, it's human, it's real, it's genuine, and if it is, God bless you. But articulate your feeling of regret to someone who is, to your knowledge, maybe an adversary down the block is not necessarily good legal advice. In every case, is fact-specific, Rabbi. I'm telling you that there are no two cases in my entire life where the same rule, I think, works.
Okay, so here there may be, I don't know if there's a conflict, but I would say from the Torah standards, I speak as a rabbi now, there is a responsibility, not just to God. If you've hurt another person, actually apologizing to God doesn't help because you've hurt another person. God cannot forgive the crime you may have hurt another. And I think there is a critical psychological, emotional, and spiritual element to asking for forgiveness, apologizing to those we've hurt. I'm not getting into the legal matters. As a matter of fact, this may preempt anything legal, and it does have an effect. I mean, there are people who have hurt us, and if they come to you with a sincere apology, there's even an obligation for them to do so, and there's even an obligation on you to forgive them. You can't say, you know what, I'm not going to forgive them, you hurt me too much, and so on and so forth. There are obviously exceptions. For example, if you forgive them and it will hurt you in return, then you don't have to forgive them, and there are other exceptions. But in the Hebrew, there's a word for forgiveness, it's called mechila. Mechila in Hebrew also means a circle. Remember, we are a social order of relationships. When someone hurts another person, and it could be a friend, it could be a family member, it could be a parent, it could be a child, it could be a spouse, or a stranger, the circle in your relationship has somewhat been severed. So apologizing and asking for forgiveness and gaining forgiveness, in a way, repairs that rupture. Now, I'm not discussing now legal ramifications. There you should get advice from a lawyer if it may affect you in some way that may hurt you.
No shortage of lawyers
right,
here.
Exactly. There are probably more lawyers than clients.
I agree with you. Rabbi, I agree with you. I think that if you hurt someone and you want to have, cleanse your heart, there are cases where, saying you're sorry is halachically appropriate and maybe even under the circumstances legally appropriate. But you, in the first instance, speak as a rabbi, and I understand that, and I don't. In the first instance, I look at these instances as a trained lawyer. My reluctance to advise someone to apologize, it's because in my experience, rarely do the apologies work effectively, and more often than not, they blow up and backfire.
But I'm talking like, say, an example where a parent has hurt a child, or a child has hurt a parent, and they're not going to any lawyers
How
necessarily.
about if a child disappointed a parent?
Okay,
No,
that's another forum for another year. We've got enough to cover here. So I do want to say this, since we are in the season now, we're coming to Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, I find it, even as speaking to all kinds of audiences, Jewish and non-Jewish, it's a fascinating topic that the famous cliche that to err is human, to forgive is divine. The idea that we have the opportunity to repair mistakes we made is an unbelievable thing that's not appreciated enough. Because we all have made mistakes, and we all will make mistakes. But you're not damaged goods, and we're not fatalistic. There's always hope. One of the most beautiful things about Yom Kippur, as a universal message, is the birth of hope, the birth of forgiveness, that there's nothing in life that cannot be repaired. And this is outside of the legal realm and even PR realm. I'm talking about our souls and our spirits. And I'm talking about between humans and also between us and God. And I think when Moses gained that aspect right after Kol Nidre, right in the beginning of the most sacred day of the year, we say those words where God says to Moses, after 80 days, Moses begging for forgiveness for the people who did a tremendous sin. It was essentially equivalent of adultery. They built a golden calf and essentially defied God. They created a false god, an idol. And God finally says, I've forgiven them as you've asked me to do. The greatest act, I believe, in history, that a human being stood up to God, would not take no for an answer, and he gained forgiveness, and gained for all of us, till this day, the element of hope. So with all the
And
discussions,
that,
and there are
that
many-
happened on Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is the anniversary of the forgiveness of the Jewish
Exactly.
people. Exactly.
So Yom Kippur is that day, and that's why it's such a powerful day. And it's a lesson that I think all of us can learn from tremendously. In many ways transcends many of the nuances and legalities of it, but it touches upon, I think, which really is what the most important part of is the dignity of our spirit. Each
30
one of us.
seconds for each panelist. Final thought on the global topic. I'll tell you a quick story, and then we're done to get our challahs. Karen, overall topic, last word.
I think this topic is not going away. I think that it is going to grow over time, and I think that I appreciate that you spent the time to address it, and I hope my panelists forgive me for disagreeing, although I wouldn't take back a thing I said.
Jeff,
Yeah, I really appreciate the chance to have this discussion from all these different perspectives. If you have a really silly idea, you want to do something stupid, don't film it.
Mr. Brofman.
With all the respect, Karen, I'm used to it. You didn't lay a glove on me. I'm small, but I have broad shoulders. And I think that I live in a very complicated world. Of course, I think I'm literally a devout Jew to some extent. I believe in God, and I ask forgiveness on Yom Kippur for my own sins. But, in the legal world, when you mentioned acceptance of responsibility a little while ago, in federal court, if you plead guilty under the sentencing guidelines, you get a 3-point adjustment for acceptance of responsibility. So very often it means the difference between getting 90 months or 120 months. And when you're talking to somebody who's never been in jail before, 90 months is a long time. They're not thinking of, wow. And sometimes judges find acceptance to be a very compelling fact, and they downwardly depart or express a variance from the guidelines that are no longer mandatory. And sometimes, the response from the judges is, you don't need my forgiveness, you need the forgiveness of the people you stole the money to. So it's not that simple. And I say again, and I stand by that, every single case is fact-specific. Who is the person? What is the crime? What is their background? What is their family circumstance? And sometimes you understand it, and sometimes you don't. But we're all, human, and I think you mentioned it earlier. We all have faults to some degree, and as a criminal defense lawyer, I recognize I don't pass moral judgment on what people do.
Thank you.